Please rise for the flag salute, led by Councilmember Diane Ridley. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Councilmember Brzezicki.
Here.
Councilmember Eyer. Here. Councilmember McHenry.
Here.
Councilmember Reddington. Here. Councilmember Hope.
Here.
Councilmember Napoli. Councilmember Watson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Under additions or corrections to the agenda, on consent agenda, please add payroll for February 13th, 2019, in the amount of $578.94. Payroll for February 20th, 2019, in the amount of $120,949.17. And claims in the amount of $146,205.15. Under new business, item 8, please remove the executive session and add into the item number 6, executive session performance of a public employee. I authorize mayor to execute separation agreement between the city of Duval and Margarita Guzman. That executive session will still be scheduled for 15 minutes and will extend if necessary. Are there any council members that would like to speak this evening? Councilmember Eyer. All right. Anyone else? All right. Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve this evening's agenda? Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. We have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. All right. Under ratification of contracts under declaration of emergency, there are none for the Public Works emergency. We do not have any contracts as a result of the recent emergency over the last couple of weeks. Do we have any comments from the audience this evening? If so, please approach the podium and provide your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. All right, seeing none, we will move into executive session for 15 minutes. I'd like to call the Duval City Council meeting back to order after executive session at 7:31 p.m. We're now moving on to scheduled items. So first up is mayor's report. The last few weeks have been extraordinarily busy with the snow emergencies and the extended length of time that our crews were trying to take care of our community. Did want to say a special thank you. What many folks don't realize is in a long-standing emergency, one of their key challenges is having to feed your staff. And I think that a huge thank you needs to go out to Chief Carrie Hurt, who's not here this evening, who made almost all the grocery runs to make sure that the PD and Public Works crews had food through the weekend and through the evenings, and had everything they needed to stay nourished throughout the emergency. As well as I'd like to thank Councilmember Stamplin and Councilmembers McHenry, who made some fabulous soups and cornbread and cookies and brought those up to the Joint Operations Center at the Fire District when we went into full-on activation and communication mode. As well as thank you to Ixtapa for donating dinner one evening for our crews. I went down to order and was told, no, you guys are taking care of us, so we're going to take care of you. So a huge thank you to them and being good community partners and supporting our staff and crews and the fire district as well. I attended the Sound Cities Association board retreat last Friday. We've got a lot of good work moving forward. Board members will be working on bringing in members of councils that haven't been as active before in our caucus areas, and so we are developing an action plan for that. in addition to the normal work that Sound Cities does. The Association of Washington Cities Legislative Action Days was canceled for, I think, the first time in history last week as a result of the snowstorm. In fact, Olympia closed, the legislature closed for the first time since the Snoqualmie earthquake, which gives you an idea of the magnitude of the situation our region was dealing with. So while we weren't able to go down to Olympia, our assistant Diana Hart will be trying to schedule meetings for me within the next week, and hopefully we can add a council member onto that to go pull members off the floor to talk about our agenda, as well as hopefully talk to them in advance over the phone, since we weren't able to get down in person last week. I think that's about it for right now. I'll definitely have more of an update at our next meeting. So with that, we'll move on to council. Councilmember Iyer.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank the city staff, public works, and the police department for their excellent work, kind of keeping things running as best as possible. And thank you very much for your work on it.
Welcome. All right, moving on to administration update.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the community. So typically every council meeting, we try to provide administrative update. We try to keep it regularly, where we do it at every meeting. Sometimes it's once a month, but we've had quite a bit we've had happen in the last couple weeks. So tonight, we've already talked about the snowstorm response that was done at the council of the whole. You know, what we're in now is this phase of what I call catching up post-snowstorm. And that'll take us a couple weeks, I think, to kind of just get back to our regular daily duties. Plus, we have to really go back and look at, you know, how much money was spent in different areas, make sure that it's while it's fresh in our mind that we write everything out. So we'll be working. We have an all-staff training scheduled for February and March on ethics. It's one of the topics that we're continuing to train pretty much year-round now on different pieces. Just so everybody knows, we do officially have a first draft of the personnel policy. So this is it. It went to WCIA in January. That was one of the last pieces of policy that we at least were working on in this first push for human resources. We're also getting ready to end our declaration of emergency on staffing. And so we're hopefully tonight that will happen. I did want to talk just a little bit about the declaration of staffing. We're obviously going to have to follow up at a future meeting because, you know, things that we like to look at administratively, and then I'm assuming council's expectations of us as administration and mayor, are what were the costs incurred during the emergency? What have we done during the staffing emergency? What are our learning lessons? And how do we move forward out of this declaration of emergency so that hopefully it doesn't happen again and we end up in a time like this again. So looking at, looking at kind of what that report will look like coming back to council, I want to kind of just give you an overview of items that will be in it. So one of the things we'll talk about is what policy work have we completed that's been, you know, on the to-do list for honestly as long as I've been here with the city. So we completed our anti-harassment policy, our information technology policy, our employee ethics policy, and our personal communication device policy. The mayor has drafted and deployed a draft of our mission, vision, values, and goals, and at some point, the mayor will be sharing that with council. Right now, it's going back through a process with all of our managers and directors for input, and that's due at the end of this week. We're also scheduling additional training for staff and managers. So there's some that's been completed, some that's in process. So our big drive this year is to have all managers and directors begin the WCIA supervisory skills. And so we're starting to see that. It'll take about 1.5 years or 2 years for managers and directors to complete that. Plus, there's also other training that we've already implemented, whether it's safety training in public works or other type of training in other departments. We're also rebuilding relationships with state agencies and partners. We kind of lost a little bit of track on our relationships with our agency partners. We're also trying to stabilize our workplace morale because that always takes a hit when there's change in your work environment. So we're working on that stabilization. We're also getting ready to deploy a staff survey, which will help us better identify staff morale, and that will go out via SurveyMonkey March 4th. And so we'll take in some really probably tough critiques of just the whole system and how it works. And we'll have to come back and take a look at that. I think that pretty much summarizes the majority of what our report will do, with the exception of we need to bring back what the costs are that we incurred during that declaration of emergency. We have not had a lot of staffing in the finance department over the last week and a half to 2 weeks. And so we weren't able to pull that. Plus I need to go back and work with all the impacted departments to see, even if we issued a contract approval for $20,000, do we actually use all $20,000? So now it's just going back and looking to see what we actually did spend during that emergency. If there are any questions, I can take them. Yes.
So the employee policy manual, which I understand has been drafted, that would be, it would live in the realm of like administrative order, right? And not a legislative action of any kind, is that correct?
Correct. Chapter 4 in our existing code will be repealed, and then this will be administrative order. As soon as it's reviewed by WCIA and we send it for courtesy review to the union, then we'll bring back a presentation to council, and you'll also get to see a copy of this.
That'd be interesting to know. 'Cause
It's
I-
very thick. So
Yeah, it looks
there's a lot.
healthy.
Yeah, it's
I
beefy.
will say, one of the nice things about, besides it being the right thing to do risk management wise, pulling chapter 4 code out, is that this policy will be able to be nimble in the fact that as new court rulings happen and new laws pass, we'll be able to simply add to this. And as we identify maybe some obscure policies that we might not have right now, but might need for our particular communities, it's a lot easier to add it. The process is a lot smoother, and it's easier to get the employees to sign off and bring it in as part of the standard work.
So just be interested to see that, because we repealed the code. And then
We
I'd
will
like
not
to-
repeal the code until we have this through
Until
the
that's
CIA,
in
through
process.
and through council.
So that'd be interesting to know in comparison, and then the cost, thank you for looking into that. I'd like to kind of know what the cost was in emergency, and then, lessons learned would be a good thing, because we had a briefing when things weren't going so well, but I haven't been informed of what occurred during the process of that. I don't think others in council have either. Be nice to know how this transpired, right? And then where we are now. Ideally, this policy document will provide better guidance, both for staff, but also on the administrative level to address certain things. And then primarily I'm interested in specific instances that we were made aware of, and then how these policies that we would have now prevent certain things that occurred from happening. I don't need to get into those right now, but it'd be a good discussion to have, and I think just more so in the context of the discussion of when that document's ready and having costs and understanding the issue. Okay.
The short answer is implementing the policy. You can have a policy, but if it's not implemented, it won't be effective. And administration feels very strongly about implementing policies and changing the way we do business internally, and those actions have already been occurring.
Are there any other questions for administration this evening? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Next up, we have an update from King County Fire District 45, Chief David Burke.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm David Burke, the Fire Chief, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of information about the district. And unless you've been out of town, we have a lot of information to share about the district. It has been crazy lately. I don't want to duplicate what you probably talked about in the CAL as far as the report and things like that. I'll highlight a couple of things that we did during the question phase. If you have additional information you'd like to know, I'm happy to share. So January was one call short of our busiest January in our history with 112 calls. February is off to a booming start. And if the month ended today, we are 10 short of our busiest February ever. Ironically, if you add the two of those together, and again, if February ended today, we are tied with our year-to-date total of the busiest first 2 months of the year in recorded history. So looking back through the snowstorm, we were averaging 9 and 10 calls a day. And I'm very proud to say that we made every single call we were dispatched to, every single one. And that includes calls that were outside of our district. One that was challenged for a neighboring district, and unfortunately there was a long response time, but our brush truck, which is our go-to beast in the snow, it's a very aggressive four-wheel drive truck. Normally we use it for wildland type fires, but it gets a second purpose during the winter because it is great in the snow and ice. And so we're able to chain that up and access areas that the big engines can't get to. And I'll tell you what, it made a huge difference. I will also say that I sent out a letter to the chief of Redmond Fire Department. As part of our ALS tiered system, we share paramedics with several other areas, and our paramedics are normally based out of Cottage Lake in the Woodinville area. Recognizing the potential for the storm, Chief Tommy Smith of Redmond staffed our station with 2 paramedics in an SUV, and they were there for the entire duration of the storm and responded with our people side by side, whether it was just a basic life support call or an advanced life support call. They were hands-on every single time. And I'll tell you what, the value that brought to our citizens was huge. We didn't deliver any babies during the storm, but we had 2 pregnancies that were of concern. And so we were able to access those people and say, hey, we can get to you, which really lowered the anxiety quite a bit. And so, if you look outside and you see 2 or 3 feet of snow and you think, oh my gosh, it's my first child, I've got a little bit of a complication, how's this going to work out? They were very relieved to see people there saying, hey, we got to, no problem. And so those are some of the happy kinds of things. I do want to share with you and echo the mayor's thanks to council members McHenry and Napa, because when they brought food into the Joint Operations Center, a lot of us were there for 14 hours that day. And you can't just run down the street and grab something to eat and everything else. And so for all the people coming through that I saw on the plows, the firefighters, the people that were staffing, all of those things, to have a nice warm meal that you didn't have to worry about was just so valuable to us. So thank you very much. Very thoughtful. And the mayor coordinating, trying to help with food. We weren't, as a fire district, we weren't always tied into the meals until we opened up the Joint Operations Center. But I'll tell you what, to have a pot of coffee, a warm place for whether it's a police officer, public works, or whatever, to have them sit there and just unwind for a minute and relax and de-stress, so valuable. The second point to the Joint Operations Center is actual functionality. And I've got to say, in the 15 and a half years that I've been in this city, it was probably the best run event like this we've had, and probably one of the most severe. And so communication worked, and obviously there's some things we'd like to work on, and I'm trying to have a debrief after action meeting coming up with all the players, hopefully by the end of the week, where we can identify some of those things. But I'll tell you what, we found a way. There were obstacles with some of the communication, we overcame. There were obstacles with access, we overcame. Coordinating between resources that came from state, county, or even the National Guard, a couple of bumps in the road, but we overcame. And the bottom line is, the needs of the community came forward, and everybody had a common goal, and we made huge strides towards that. So I'm very proud, and for you as the council, I want you to know that the Public Works folks, working side by side with them was just great. And I'm spoiled because we work regularly with police on emergency calls, and so we have that camaraderie and kinship and things with MRA. But the Public Works thing for us, and then the city staff, we took that to a whole nother level this time. You can't work that closely with people without becoming close. And I'll tell you, the benefit is the community. So thank you for that, and hats off to all those people that were involved. I learned more about employees than I had before, and I'm just so pleased. And I'm looking forward to taking it to the next step, so we're not complacent.
Chief, if I may add, it was definitely worked very well when the Joint Operations Center opened and everyone came together. It was as if it was the everyday thing, was the way that the office was running, which was very, very pleasing for my EOC experienced heart as well. And I think one of the things that it really goes to show is that having our staff trained up on as many FEMA classes as possible is critical to our success in these situations.
Right, and I'll go ahead and plant the seed for the mayor and the city staff. There's probably going to be some recommendations and considerations along budget time, because I'm going to do the same thing with my board. We have the basic tools, but how do we take it to the next step? What can make it better? I mean, there are a lot of things that went really, really well. There's a couple of small tweaks that we can make and do even more good, a whole lot easier, and make it a lot smoother. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'll tell you what, the relationship with the city and the district and all departments of the city, it's just phenomenal. And I'm just so encouraged by that, because some of the things that I normally stand up here and talk to you about as far as disaster preparedness and emergency preparedness, how we deal with the quake and everything else, it's one thing to train for something. Like an athletic analogy here, you go to practice every single day, learn to play, whether it's baseball, football, whatever it is, and you never have a game. But when the game comes, and not that you're wishing misfortune or tragedy on anybody, and it works, there's a euphoria that goes with that, and a new appetite that makes you want to train even more. And so that's where we are right now, because we've celebrated a little bit of success. We've seen great benefit, and so now our appetites are growing because we want to do even better the next time. So just a great thing. Let's see. I think I've been talking to you about our two new engines. We're a little bit delayed. They've revised our delivery schedule to probably first or middle part of May. Our strong desire is to have both of those in the Duval Days Parade, so we're looking forward to that. The last official thing that I have here has to do with the strategic plan, and there will be an invitation that will be sent to the city. And I've mentioned it before, it will be on the evening of Wednesday the 13th, and we'll need one representative from the city that can participate. And so it's like a 3-hour commitment, I guess starting around 6, it'll say on the invitation. But those should go out the end of the week, and I really would value somebody from this group right here to be able to participate, because we are your fire department, and you should have a lot of say and influence in what our strategic plan and how we plan to move forward in the next 5 years and beyond goes. So if at all possible, please find a way for one of you to attend, and we would be very appreciative for that. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or expand on anything that I've kind of skipped over.
I did want to add one more thing, is that we do talk a lot about public works and police and fire, but the also reality is that our clerk, our community development director / city administrator, our front office staff, even while they were not all at the Joint Operations Center, they played a significant role in communicating with our residents as well, including Diana Hart, who helped field social media quite a bit during some breaks when PIOs have breaks. And when these things happen, when we say all hands on deck, we mean it, and every employee has a role in participating and assisting with these things. And I know that your folks behind the scenes did as well. And it's definitely greatly appreciated, I think, by everyone in the community. I've not heard anything but positive feedback and support for all of the work that everyone did.
Absolutely. Any questions?
Chief, I for this recognition Wednesday the 13th for the strategic plan, is that next month?
Yes, it'll be March 13th, Wednesday the 13th. And it's part of a 3-day thing, so we'll have support-based groups, and that's where he categorized, our consultant categorized the city in. And then internal members will be in a 2-day workshop following that. And then so hopefully within about 30 to 40 days, we'll have the final product, and we'll present it, and I'll be happy to share that with you guys, because something very exciting, right? You look at that, and that's what you budget based on, and guide the organization. It's the map, so we're looking forward to that.
Anything else for Chief Burke? Thank you.
Again, thank you very much. I appreciate all the help over the last week and a half, 2 weeks.
We do not have any presentations this evening, or a public hearing, so next up would be under new business. Authorize the mayor to execute separation agreement between the city of Duval and Margarita Guzman. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. Next up is Agenda Bill 19-09, resolution for facility rental fees for discussion only. Ms. Wyckoff.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Jody Wyckoff, City Clerk. Before you tonight is your first official touch of the public facility rental fee schedule. I do want to make sure that everybody understands this does not apply to our parks or sports fields, strictly our buildings known as the Rose Room, Duval Visitor Center, Rec Center, and Depot. Let me flip to my pages here. Staff is recommending an hourly rental fee for nonprofits and community groups at a rate of $25 per hour, for-profits or private events at $40 an hour. We are also recommending all-day rental fees, which would be the equivalent of approximately 6 hours of rental. We are also recommending a damage deposit, which is refundable. It would be on a scale, so the first 25 people, it would be $50, 26 to 50 would be $100, and then alcohol use would be an additional $250 deposit in addition to the attendance deposit. We also have Exhibit B, which is a non-exhaustive list of examples of the nonprofits, community groups, for-profits, private events, etc. We are asking council to authorize the city administrator or designee to amend this list, seeing as time goes by and we are renting out to different groups. We're going to find groups that aren't currently identified, and this is not meant to encompass each and every single rental, but it would be helpful to be able to amend the list as needed to provide guidance to staff and the public. Staff did do a comparison of other rooms for rent within the city limits. So we looked at the fire district and the school district. We looked at other entities, including Monroe, Snoqualmie, Carnation, Woodinville, and Sideview Metropolitan Park District, and compared rates and how their rate structures were set, whether it's nonprofit, private, if they had deposits and such. We also did a comparison of how much the operations and maintenance of each building versus how much we could bring in revenue-wise at the current and proposed rates. And Lastly, there are 2 resolutions that are currently on the books that should probably be repealed because they specifically set rates for the Rose Room, and we just need to get those repealed with this action. And I am available for questions.
Does anyone have any questions or feedback from Ms. Wykoff? Mayor Person Irvington.
When we do this, I thought about our new summer stage. Do we ever have requests for renting the summer stage? Have we ever had that for our road?
We used to have a policy where we would rent it out for $200 a day or something, and we had a deposit. Because of that stage and the age and the liability, we had to stop renting it out. Laura may be able to speak on whether or not we're looking at that, but that would not be a part of this schedule because we're trying to keep this strictly to actual physical facilities.
We haven't created a policy for the rental of that piece of equipment. It's on our list of policy work though. But I know another adjacent city has the same piece of equipment and they create a policy, so it'll be one that we would look at. And then they have a cost, I think their minimum cost is $500
Yeah.
for the rental of that. So we'll bring that forward back. Maybe that's the next kind of rental fee.
It'll probably be something we want to do soon.
General
Sandblast usually uses it, and so does Duval's.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rivkin.
So I just want to say thank you. As someone who has rented that facility, I think that we're now on par, and I'm glad that we've raised that rate to make it more of a benefit for our citizens. And I'm really pleased with seeing that it's fair because it does have a scale for nonprofits, but for those who are going to use it for profit, definitely, I'm really pleased that we've increased that to cover the maintenance. So thank you.
Councilmember McHenry.
I just want to say thank you for also expanding that to include community groups. I think that will help a lot. And I like the raises, the increases for the rates. I think it's a lot more reasonable. I think it's still reasonable, but also helps cover costs.
I do want to mention one thing, the facility revenue versus expense worksheet that staff created. I do want to make sure that that council understands that we did this based on actual usage for 6 months, and we just doubled it because right now we literally write the reservations in a calendar, handwritten calendar, and it was quite extensive calculations trying to go back and review all that. So we just did 6 months average and then doubled it, and then we do not have any history for the rec center, obviously, because we had a long-term lease going. So we just took the depot and kind of guesstimated that if council chooses to rent out that building, that would be what we could potentially expect. So I don't want council or the public to look at these estimated revenue numbers and then be disappointed if we don't reach that.
Councilmember Acland.
Thank you. I'm excited to see that we're addressing the fee structure and making it a different rate for nonprofit and community groups. I think that's a good step. I have a couple ideas and suggestions, and I'm curious how the rest of council feels. Just looking at some of the other neighboring cities, there's a few that aren't on this list, which, it's hard to create an exhaustive list of comparisons, but it seems that a lot of other cities distinguish pricing between the size of the room, and I know our capacity might be similar, but the opportunity and different type of events that you could hold in the much larger DVC or the rec center is much different, and I think it warrants a slightly higher rental cost, or maybe alternatively, the more meeting room size facilities should have a slightly less cost possibly, so that you would encourage the utilization of facilities based on your need, so that someone, a group wouldn't necessarily go straight to the DVC or the rec center when they could be, where their usage could be accommodated by one of the smaller facilities. to make sure that we don't end up using up the time in the larger facilities for groups that don't really need that big of space. So I don't know if there's a suggestion of how much that would be. I just thought I'd raise that, just looking at other cities of meeting room size, like the Rose Room or even the Depot. I mean, if you look, I think the Rose Room is about 800 square feet. The Depot is probably about the same, 800 square feet. Maybe use the capital facilities plan to figure out the square footage versus the Duval Visitor Center, which is 2,400 square feet, or the Rec Center, which is 3,000. So those buildings are have about 3 times the space and just different usage potential. So I don't know if that's something that we could consider. I also was looking at the alcohol usage, and I see we have a damage deposit, which I think, an extra damage deposit for the alcohol use, which I fully support. But I wonder if we should consider having another just non-refundable portion of the fee, because when a group is going to use alcohol, there's additional paperwork that needs to be processed. There's just other aspects to it, and so maybe even just a $25 when you put in your application for alcohol usage, maybe you pay a $25 fee, and that would cover over time. You know, if alcohol is being served, there's, you know, maybe more need for carpet cleaning, things like that, and so that part would be non-refundable. And let's see. There was something else. Oh, the other item was on the list of nonprofit versus more for-profit. HOAs were listed under more of the for-profit section, and my HOA is a nonprofit. I think most nonprofits, maybe all nonprofits have to, or all HOAs are nonprofit. So I think it might be a little confusing to have that listed under for-profit. Almost exclusively HOAs are nonprofit. And also they're a community group. There are residents who want to meet, and I just think it would make sense to move that. And also, you know, maybe the private parties, although I don't know. Some cities break it down whether you're a resident or a non-resident as well, and so if it's a resident, I don't know, hard to say. I was just throwing that out there. So I'm curious what everyone else thinks.
Anybody else have any feedback? Councilmember Hook?
I actually was thinking along the same lines of, in regards to the alcohol, as you were, Councilman Knappman, that maybe there's a non-refundable portion of that, but is there an extra licensing that has to happen? Is that?
So for the alcohol use, that was adopted through the policy process that you guys just went through. So trying to remember right off the top of my head, definitely a certificate of insurance. You have to have a mixologist. You have to have the catering or the banquet license through the state liquor board, liquor and cannabis board. We have a special form that will be part of the new application. As part of this entire process, we developed a new application as well to adopt all these new things. So there's an additional form, I believe, that you will have to fill out just for the alcohol use part of it. I think that's it.
Can I make, or I think if we're going to work towards a non-refundable deposit, I would exclude food from it as well, so maybe it's alcohol and food, because food is harder for us to clean up than sometimes alcohol is. And unlike some facilities in other jurisdictions, they have like tile floors or some sort of laminate, and most of the heaviest use facility is carpet.
So the only question that I would pose to that would be, are we going to treat people who just serve cookies and water at their event the same
Food
way?
is free, food and alcohol will have.
Oh, I see, okay.
That would be at least my recommendation, if we're gonna, like, so that we're not separating out alcohol versus other things. Because I think honestly, we've seen more damage from birthday parties than we have from alcohol.
Councilmember Bernicki?
In regards to the size of the unit, I think consideration needs to be made if you're going to charge more for size, really to look at capacity. Because the one thing about GBC is very limited in capacity. So I think it's 45 people. When I'm looking to rent, I look at what the capacity of the unit allows for. So if you're going to change the structure of how much do we rent something, that needs to be a consideration.
I agree, I think you should look at capacity, but the capacity of the DVC is very limited right now.
It's technically the same as the Rose Room because of the emergency access issue.
We haven't heard from others yet. Was there anyone else that wanted to speak to this? Councilmember Iyer.
Yeah, I'd be in support of looking at the size of the rooms and the capacity. Obviously keeping in mind that the whole goal of this was to simplify the fee structure. But in general, I think its costs are very low. But any way that we could seek to recoup costs to maintain these buildings would be ideal. And so I would support that. And I would support other efforts to recoup costs in terms of alcohol usage. But again, I guess one more simple iteration of this would be ideal because the simplicity will help save time for everyone.
Anyone that has not spoken, Councilmember Walker?
So I'm fine also with the ideas that have been suggested. I think ideally it's good to have a consolidated rental policy for the city. One question is that, was it considered to index these fees? Because these are fixed, right? And so to do any increase, we would need to, is it done by ordinance? Is that the mechanism?
Resolution.
Resolution, okay. So theoretically then, several years from now, these fees are not generating what they do with inflation, we'd have to adopt a new schedule. Is that how that would go?
Yeah, basically you would probably just repeal and replace this resolution with a new one, setting the new fees. We did internally talk briefly about doing an inflator of some sort, CPI, or, but we didn't get much traction internally just because the dollar amounts, like simple numbers.
Like fraction
Yeah,
of cents.
exactly. So one of the things that I'm hoping to be able to accomplish by the end of this year, cross my fingers, is to create a fee resolution, which would encompass all fees within the city. So this would be
Right.
part of that. And so every year, council would be reviewing all of the fees at least once. And so if council feels, you know what, we need to bump these up a couple dollars or whatever, that would be a good time to do it, so.
And to tack onto that, this is, those discussions will also end up when you build the real capital assets and facilities planning policies, is that those inflators will have to be considered as the cost of doing business, but also the cost of how we plan for the maintenance and rebuilding in times of our buildings. So that's all in the long-term pipeline, but we do need to get a policy moving pretty quickly and get it updated. And as any policy, it can always be amended at any time.
I like the idea of looking at maybe a separate fee ordinance, and kind of some idea of what's fair, what's reasonable over time, because there's so many little things like this that, once we set something in policy or code, it tends to stay that way for a decade or so. But nonetheless, I think it's good to get those things together. Do we know what the capacity, the rental capacity is versus what we're capturing overall for these facilities? I know rec centers that standalone cases.
I don't know the percentage of hours in a day that are currently rented versus not rented. I do know that the Rose Room is booked for at least one meeting every single day of the week. The Depot, not as many weekend days as I thought that it would have, but that bumps up in the summertime. A lot of people use the Depot for special events in the summertime. The DBC is, it's kind of, we don't have enough history yet because we just took it back over from the chamber in May. So we're definitely getting some use out of it, but it's also the one building that the city uses the most for our meetings. So we have a lot of non-paying hours in that building. And again, the rec center, we have long-term lease, so I have nothing to go off of.
So my thought is just that, and this can be done any way you can find a way to do it, but just marketing these facilities to the community, letting them know that they're available and making it easy for them to try to.
And we have a facilities module on the website that at least gives a description and stuff, so once these fees are passed, we'll be updating those with the new fees and everything. But yeah, pushing them out through social media and stuff is not a bad idea.
Something like that, yeah, there could be a list on the website or social media. These facilities are available to rent. I think the fees seem quite reasonable. I think if more people are aware of them, then maybe we can capture more use. And
We haven't heard from Mayor Pro Tem Remington yet. Did you have anything to add?
Well, I like the changes made. I think they're just updating, making it more modern. I do think there's some wisdom in taking a look at the size of facilities, and if there's a practical way to include those in a simple way without making the fee structure too difficult. But I really support what's being done.
Any other Councilmember McHenry?
I just want to chime in and also support some of the ideas that were just brought up after I spoke about kind of looking at capacity or size. And again, yeah, if there's a simple way, I don't want it to get too complicated for staff, but that I would support that as well.
So it sounds like there's consensus to look at non-refundable deposits and the space needs, and we'll have staff go back and bring that back to the next meeting or next possible opportunity.
There was one other suggestion I just want head nod on, if I could, on the HOA moving that from the higher rate list to the lower rate list. Council okay with that?
All right, thank you. Moving on to Agenda Bill 19-10, Riverview School District Memo Understanding, Annexation and Vesting for discussion only. Ms. Thomas.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and members of the audience. This evening is the first touch of the memorandum of understanding between the Riverview School District and the City of Duval. The MOU came in while we were still working on the capital facilities plan, so just for some history for those members in the audience and to refresh Council Mayor's memory, because we do a lot of work, is last year during the 2018 comprehensive plan amendment process, the school district and the property owner came to the city and was looking at a property within our urban growth area reserve, which is identified within our existing comprehensive plan as an area that we were looking to grow into in the near term and probably likely for 20 years. And that North UJR section, we were looking at potentially giving back to the county and having them look at area down and south of Big Rock Road. And so it wasn't on our radar to be looking at development, but an opportunity came up for the school district, and so we had several meetings and discussions last year. And so they docketed a portion of the UJR to be pre-zoned public facilities, and that went through its comprehensive plan process all through last year, and then obviously during the fall when we do the majority of our workshops and planning within the Planning Commission and Council. And that was approved in December, and so there's an area now that's been taken out of the North UGR that's now designated for pre-zoning of public facilities, which would allow the school district to build a facility there or facilities. As part of the process for the school district, they did want to have a discussion and an agreement with the city, which is typically known as a memorandum of understanding. And the district drafted a version of that, and it is now going through the process. Essentially what the agreement would do is it would best to policies that we have, specifically the tree protection policies and the critical area policies. So it would do that, and it would also best essentially their information that was gathered last year as part of their comprehensive planning process. And so the school district, Ruby, I'm not sure if it's going to be Ruby or Denise this evening, they'll be giving them a presentation, maybe a combination of both, and obviously Dr. Smith is here, and also the property owner. So this is an opportunity now for the school district to present the MOU, and then we'll definitely have time for dialogue, feedback, discussion before it goes on to the next part of the process.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Ruby Perez, and with me I have Denise Farmer representing the Ruby School District. Laura's pretty much covered it all, so we're done. We're out of the questions. No kidding. So just a little history on we're going to go over a little bit of background. We're also going to talk about purpose and overview the MOU and why we're requesting this, and then have time for Q&A and answer any questions that you may have moving forward. So this is the property that we're looking at that all of you are familiar with. It's on 150th. It's across the street from the high school, and it's about 63 acres or so, 25 net usable, and those are really rough numbers. The district is currently under contract to purchase the property. Like I said, it's 62 acres and 25.85 usable acres, and it's across the street from the high school. We're going to talk about what our plans are for that property. We have a letter that we submitted to the city as well, letting them know what our plans were for 2020 and what they were moving forward. So we'll go over that a little bit more just to refresh your memories and just to let you know that we still stand where we said we stood. I can't believe we're saying last year, but it just seems like just a couple months ago. But yes, we actually went through this last year. So we'll be going over what our plans are with the property. This currently is a map of the property with all the wetland buffers and the trail system that we plan on using. The current city buffers are probably the most strict in the state. The counties are actually about 25 feet less. So bringing this property into the city, we lose about 25 feet of land within the buffer. So we're willing to take that risk just to have that relationship with the city and that ability to work with the city moving forward. In 2020, we plan on throwing a bond out there for the city and all taxpayers to actually expand Cedar Crest High School. And if we have to expand Cedar Crest High School, we might lose some parking. And we know that, when you expand, all the plans have to go through the city for approval, and they measure the parking lots we have that we're going to lose, and we're going to have somewhere to, replace those parking lots we may use. We're currently working with architects and seeing what our plans are moving forward. We definitely want to work on our CTE program. Our commons area is too small. So we have a bond committee right now where we're actually looking at what we might want to do with the high school, and there is going to be some growth there. And we are seeing that we may lose some parking. So having this property there would be very helpful. In addition to that, we also wanted to incorporate the trail system with that 2020 bond and maybe add some additional fields and just parking or whatever we needed. We don't plan on building a school there or actually looking at what our school needs might be for another 20 years or so. We definitely don't plan on putting a middle school there in 20 years. We will look at and see where our plans are, what our growth is moving forward, and then decide. But the need for the property in 2020 is really important for the district because architects are looking at what we have available and what we will need for our expansion of Cedar Crest High School. We're also maybe looking at parking maybe 5 buses back there just for emergency purposes, and also to cut back on the travel and the actual traffic that we actually incur because all of our buses are in Carnation. So we're looking at that as well. We thought about maybe educational facility. It's really small, just for science. CTE expanded there a little bit, but we definitely don't see a need for a 500 capacity student school. When we set out to purchase the property, we did our due diligence by seeing what was the maximum use for the property, so that way we can see that what the plans are for the future. So I don't plan on being here in 20 years, and Dr. Smith doesn't plan on being here 20 years, but we do want to have a piece of property that is available for the district in case there is some exponential growth. And definitely looking at our options. There isn't very much property available in the city. We need at least 20 acres to build a school. So we pretty much looked everywhere, and this is all that's really available for the school district to move forward and build a school if they had to in the future. Again, this is our maximum use map. This is actually looking at a 500 student school. This would be something that would happen 20, 25 years from now if we needed to. The need for fields is actually currently, it's a need, and whether or not we can afford it with this next bond, we'll take a look at that. But like I said, we don't see ourselves putting in a 500 student school there. We've even talked realistically about putting a 200 student school there that's maybe STEM, maybe it's 6 through 12, and it's catered to specific programs, but that's just us dreaming for the future. We don't know what the future superintendent will want or the future community will want, right? So we just want to leave those options available for future growth. And then we also have the transportation center that's kind of to the west there. And then we have our trail system, which we really want to do. So, as I mentioned, we are currently looking at a sales agreement. We've gone through the due diligence process. Everything's checked out. We've had tons of research done on the project, tons of reports. We're also looking at annexing the property, so we've done everything to follow through with the comp plan amendment to actually comply with that, which was adopted by City Council. We are looking at closing in May of 2020, so hopefully the bond passes and we can move on and purchase the property. The future site, as I mentioned earlier, is constrained by critical areas, and those critical areas that are set by the city are very strict. We are looking at, as I mentioned earlier, building on that property, slightly building on that property in 2020. Potential school will go in 20 years or so. We're not really seeing the growth that we would like to see. We look at our capital facilities plan, and that's based on a 2% growth that's basically continuous every year. So we are currently seeing our numbers at 1.5. I think we're really at 1% growth this year. So we're being very aggressive in planning moving forward as far as our comp plan amendment goes, but when we look at our budgeting, we're actually looking at maybe 1% growth, which is more closer to actual. So if we do have that growth, we just want to have that property available. We are in the process, as you currently know, which is why we're here, of bringing an MOU to you guys so that we can actually lock down some of those critical areas, because we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And we don't want to purchase a piece of property that has 25 net usable acres, and then 10 years from now, we only have maybe 15 net usable acres, and we lost about 10 acres or so. And to me, that does not seem like the fiscally responsible thing to do with your money. So we would actually like to take into consideration what the city currently has and lock that in for at least 10 years or so. That gives us some time and some space to actually plan and use that property the way we intend to right now. We've been very transparent coming forward. We've been communicating the best we can, so we feel that actually locking in some of those terms would help us in the long run. And Denise is going to go over the terms of the MOU with you.
So just before I dive into the details, Ruby mentioned as a part of the purchase process that the district is in right now, the due diligence piece includes looking at what to do to preserve that long-term ability to use it for the variety of uses and potentially way out in the future, the most intensive use of the site. And so a part of that, as you will, as you've seen on the slides, is looking towards city annexation of that property, and which is something that the district is preparing to move forward, but wanting to first bring this MOU to set a framework for that. And we would anticipate, as a part of that annexation, as is typical, the school district, who would then be the property owner, would enter into an annexation development agreement to address items like this that you're seeing in the MOU. So this is really a bit of a bridge, doesn't provide any assurance that annexation will occur, but it's in anticipation of that next activity. So looking at the details of the proposed MOU, it has a term. The term is the earlier of 10 years or annexation. And so again, that is with the idea that an annexation development agreement would replace this MOU. If annexation never occurs, this agreement would be out there for a 10-year period, and then it would go away if annexation would never occur. The vesting, as you've heard, is related to those specific components that make the site usable for the school district's intended purposes. So looking at the development regulations that you have in your code today for critical areas and for tree retention, and securing those for future development of the site. And then in addition to that, looking at the district reports that were prepared as a part of the future land use map amendment process that dealt with those specific items, critical areas, arborist report, habitat corridor protection, so that future permitting would look to those documents for purposes of evaluating the permit terms. Then one thing that is very important just for security, that the district doesn't purchase this property and then turn it over to someone else, is that the MOU and the vested provisions would be specific to the school district as the owner of the property developing the site for school facilities. So it's a very narrow use that is attached to the terms of this MOU. So that's the big picture overview. You see it's a rather short MOU, but it has those key provisions that, from the school district's perspective, as they evaluate whether to move forward with the purchase, are important for ensuring they can use the property for what they intend to do so in the future. And then the following slides really just talk about those studies that I mentioned. This is the critical areas map. Again, this was reviewed and accepted by the city as a part of that comp plan amendment process. The approved wetlands map, and then the tree condition assessment from the arborist report. So with that, we are available for any questions or comments you might have, and of course, Dr. Smith is here as well. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Councilmember Hoag.
Is it possible to get a clear understanding of the vesting process and how it works? Because with this being 10 years, and if you waited till the 10th year to apply for the annexation, then isn't there a longer period on top of that? And we would be agreeing that these trees, the tree survey that you have done now, would be applied for many years to come. And I just want to, that's what I understand, but I'd like to know.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, technically, if there's nothing in here that locks in these terms specifically to a future development agreement, some of this is good faith on the part of the district in believing that this provides that basis, but the city always has an additional approval step that would be in place for a future development agreement. So this sets an agreed framework that we would propose again in the future as a part of that. But I think you have touched on a piece that if annexation doesn't occur within the next few years and we get out to that 10th year, this MOU would still be in place. It would be a basis for considering a development agreement. But at that point in the future, the city council, whoever's sitting here,
might think that that's not a good idea to continue with that. So that would be a future decision point, and it would be a decision point for the district at that time, whether they would be able to move forward with either annexation or permit in King County, which is something they would rather do within the city, but I think all of that would play into it. I don't know that we would ever honestly get out to that 10-year period, but it certainly is a possibility.
Mayor Pro Tem Arlington and then Councilmember Ryder.
I'm just sharing one concern, and I think this is very wisely was put, excuse me, I think it's very wisely it was put together and does help protect the interest in the future. But I think there's another side with this certain vested rights, and especially when it comes down to the investment in the sensitive areas. You know, and I think about a school not being built for 20 or 25 years. If I were to go back 20 or 25 years, there was no tree ordinance. There was, you know, very little sensitive area. And the Cherry Creek tributaries and the water that runs off that area is certainly part of that. And it's considered one of the most endangered in all of King County. And the watersheds are currently working with the state to what that looks like. Now, I understand completely the fear that you purchase some property and lose some of that in the future. The balance, of course, is the environment. And we don't want to overdo that. I think ours are very conservative, and I don't expect there'll be huge changes. I think the school district has been very generous in designing things that really be good for all of our citizens and help protect the environment. But I'm still concerned. Many of the vestings that we do are when folks are going to build something and they bring it forward and they lock that in for a period of time. And annexation is a little bit different. But I still think we need to discuss a little bit about, you know, if you're not building for 20 or 25 years, all kinds of things can change. And I know that the school district wants to be sensitive with the environment and things, so it's a balance. And I'm not trying to say this is a bad agreement, but I just want to raise that concern. The idea that, you know, and you talk about tenure investing, I'd be a little more comfortable with that, but then that could still greatly affect, you know, something you build 20 or 25 years. So I'm not trying to make a huge point other than that is a personal concern and trying to understand what that looks like for the future. None of us have a crystal ball. I appreciate you want to lock it in, but 20, 25 years just makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable.
And I think that's fair, and I don't know if city staff want to say any more, but what I think is important for the school district to understand as they think about their long-term planning is that even a development agreement that would be adopted at annexation would have a reasonable time period. And so it very well could be, if a school is not built for 20 or 25 years, it could fall outside of that development agreement in terms of the vesting. So there has to be reasonable guardrails. I think your point is really well taken.
We'll do that. So cut me off if I'm getting too far into the weeds, but I wanted to share a little bit of information tonight too that might be helpful. So first of all, one thing we know for sure, regardless of what comes through with the architectural design for expanding Cedar Crest, additional parking is needed up in that area. And even if it's not parking during the school day, but additional parking for the large events that are held there, both for the community and the school district. Not that, truthfully, that might be in the form of a lit gravel parking lot initially, given the constraints we're going to have when we run a bond. The pre-bond planning committee will be coming up with a plan that they feel can be presented to the public during the May meeting, and thanks very much for having a council member on the pre-bond planning committee. That's been a great add. Very inclusive committee. And then there's a few things that we know, and it's in our committee minutes. This is shifted from having 3 priorities, those priorities being building a new elementary school on Big Rock Road, upgrading safety and security district-wide, expanding Cedar Crest High School with more classrooms and bigger spaces and some modernizing aspects to the CTE programs. And then what's been added is doing something more substantial to the Tolt Middle School campus. And so that's going to be, we already know that's going to be complicated, because if that building existed in Lake Washington School District with bigger infrastructure and 10 times more students, and money better, tax dollars better dispersed, that the whole campus would get torn down and rebuilt. And that's just not a possibility within the scope of what we're looking at fiscally. So, but we are looking at total as the middle school for the future. So even with Ruby's projections, with our projections for the 2% per year, which is wildly liberal. We're not experiencing that kind of growth. I don't expect that kind of growth to average out that way in the future. The middle school will only be a student population with 2% growth. We're already behind on that trajectory after 1 year. So when we did these projections, in 2038, the middle school, even with 2% growth in the district on average per year, would only be at a student population of 938 students. And it's not likely even to reach that. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of compromises that are going to be made. Right now, so 2 weekends ago, we started our surveying of the community through CFM Communications. We were doing 2 phases, a phone response and then also an email survey. The phone response was wildly successful. The projection was to get 150 phone responses, personal interviews during the weekend. I think the weather actually helped us on this because people were at home. We ended up with 250 responses. And then we wanted to wait a little bit after the weather subsided, so the written survey will be coming out sometime in the next 7 days through Constant Contact. And any of you that are not anybody can register for the district's Constant Contact just by going on the district website and then registering. If you need any help with that, you can drop a little note to my communications coordinator. We would love to have every one of your input on that survey. The survey, we had to come up with a number on the survey. The survey number is, this is no secret, the survey number is $125 million for that bond. When you look at, just stating the fact, when you look at elementaries around the region that have been built for brand new elementaries for between $40 and $60 million, you can go ahead and do the math from there for all these other projects. So, like I said, the committee will be making a recommendation, but with those 4 things, we'll end up in April and May, we'll end up cutting ideas and then coming up with a plan that we can present to the community. Regardless of what plan we present to the community, it's going to represent, I'll just say, a tax increase. I mean, at the $125 million price point, you're looking at $444 per thousand, $444 taxes for a $400,000 house/property owner. So $1.11 per thousand assessed valuation. So you can see we have some, even at that's going to be something that each taxpayer is going to have to think through carefully. If we went to the scale that we really needed to modernize all our buildings and to get this where we needed it to go, you're more looking at a price tag of around $400 million. You would have to tear down Carnation. Right now, Carnation, you have to go outside the building to get to the 2 different parts of the building. Not the best thing for safety for kids. Not the most conducive to learning. So, like I said, in other districts, both those buildings would be leveled and rebuilt. Well, we have a community to be responsible for and economy of scale in our community. So I just want to share that information to give you up-to-the-minute information about where we are. But certainly, we'll be, as far as major buildings on the property across from Cedar Crest initially, we'll be looking at things like using one existing house on one piece of property and remodeling that and looking at that as a pseudo-science conference center and not be doing much to that building. As far as the other property owner that has the barn and the house, we see great potential for our award-winning FFA program and other CTE programs to be utilizing that space. And so that's another one where we're just at the front end of seeing what could the possibilities be there. And then, like I said, once the committee, pre-bonding planning committee starts making their recommendations, and you're looking at things like, you know, a concrete parking lot, even a satellite small transportation center, that's going to have to figure it in to the whole cost. And then, in case any of you haven't been down to our existing transportation center, that is probably the building that needs the most work of any building in the whole school district. It's the building that nothing's been done for, even through our 2007 bond. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give you an update. If you have any questions for me, but this fits into the mindset of what's going on with this request, and I think it's helpful to hear the context of what we're looking at, where we are today.
Councilmember Iyer and then Councilmember Walker.
Thank you. I appreciate the context and the district's effort to appreciate the values of the district and the constraints that we have here. So with that, I do understand the concerns addressed by other council members, because I know we've seen, it's not so much specific to the school district, just long-term agreements where we vest things for 10 years. Just sounds like a long time. And I think I understand, it made sense that this is a bridge to get through the speculation portion of the land acquisition. And I'm not totally sure what the right date would be. 10 years sounds like a long time ago. A long time. I'll probably touch base with city staff and get their feedback in terms of an appropriate amount of time. So they could be premature for me to comment on any random number, but I do share concerns because we do have some other development agreements that have lingered and aren't ideal today, but they might have been 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But I do understand it's different in nature.
We share your concerns.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Walker.
It was well stated by Councilmember Iyer. I've been sitting up here for almost, not here, but I love sitting up here, but on city council elsewhere, different buildings and so forth for over 8 years, and have seen old agreements by other councils that become issues that we have to first understand and then try to reconcile. A few things that give me some comfort about this, just from my understanding, maybe this is what I want to clarify, is that there are no direct impacts to any of the wetland sensitive areas. Right? It looks like you're avoiding all impact. And would you be willing to memorialize that development approach in the context of your vesting to the sensitive areas ordinance? I can tell you why, and that would be if you did do any direct impact. I mean, vesting is fine for things that the city has, basically through our development regulations, that we are the ones administering, but once you impact a critical area, then the Corps of Engineers would get involved, potentially Department of Ecology. Under federal law, wetland delineation is only good for 5 years. Okay. I think that would do it for me as a wetland scientist reviewing wetland science for other cities. I don't think there would be a significant risk to the sensitive areas there. And actually, I like the idea that those would be potentially public ownership. I think that would be the most benefit for the function that those wetlands provide to our tributaries and to the fish downstream, etc. So that would be one thing that if, and this could even be forward. I think your MOA is fine. There's two things that I think I look for immediately. One would be transfer of this to somebody else. So we see that in private development all the time. They write this agreement just because they're going to be obviously selling or potentially selling an asset. I see this as just for reorganization. I think that's good. And secondly, the 10-year time frame for the sunset for the MOU. That's really what I'm most comfortable with in terms of a long-term development agreement that would go with the pre-annexation agreement as well. I want to make you aware of one thing you're probably already aware of, and there's a reason why you or anyone else doesn't request to invest in stormwater regulations anymore.
Correct. We understand that we cannot.
You understand that there's a little bit of nuance there, but
We have pretty deep experience, as does the city in that area.
We do as well. But we have other vested projects of stormwater, but you know, there's a court case in Snohomish County, it relies upon current science and everything else, so I mean, potentially that could happen. You never know what's going to happen in any development regulation, but if there is a similar court finding to vesting to sensitive areas, which is also based upon scientific information, then I would think that we could maybe word something in there, whereas if we're required or through other aspect of law or precedent to not administer that vesting, we would have some way to deal with that. Other than that, I think it's kind of fine how it is, and I understand what you're doing here, and especially since you're not going to be impacting anything directly, I think it could work out. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of the long-term development agreements, but the city has done them, and they've done them on the private side, incurring a lot of public costs. And this I see is probably, if this goes through, probably be the best one that we've done. I mean, it's narrow, it's limited, it's just for you, and it seems to be pretty clear how it's starting in terms of the framework for the MOU. Okay.
And just, I would like to remind council, we are supposed to wrap up by 9. So if we get going at 9, according to our procedures, we should be taking a vote to continue. So just to be cognizant of time this evening. Anybody else? Councilmember Napoli.
I just had a question. It mentioned about vesting to the wildlife or habitat corridor, and I don't remember seeing anywhere in here where it went into the newer habitat corridor, where we have a worksheet. Maybe our planning director could show me where that was. I see some areas in here that are talking about habitat corridors, but they look more like the fish corridor and more of the standard habitat type situations, not the newer habitat corridor worksheets and different things. I don't know if that's something that
I do want to follow up with council because I have some questions too, just so that I can make sure that we're moving forward. But one of the items that wasn't completely looked at was the habitat corridor, and there still are remaining questions from some of the peer review that hasn't been addressed, and so that needs to be somehow memorialized as well. And one thing I would say there, vesting to policy is definitely a legislative decision, and it is typical to see 10 years of vesting. What is unusual is that we're also agreeing to vest to the tree protection standards and the critical areas. And I do want to make sure that you fully understand that, because you will have trees that go from not significant to significant or to exceptional. And so as your staff member, I have to make sure that you fully understand that going into this agreement.
just to follow up on that, the other thing to point out is that the tree code, the critical areas code is very new, and I know staff is currently reviewing how it's gone the first year it's been implemented, and there might be some tweaks and changes. I doubt there'll be anything significant, but there could be some things that would be to the community's benefit and maybe even to the benefit of the school district. If we could get some tweaks in there, and so I would hate to miss out on some of the lessons we learned and how we can make the code even a little bit better by vesting to something, code that's only been in effect for a year and really hasn't been fine-tuned. So that would be another concern that I have.
Any other council members that haven't spoken yet? Councilmember McHenry.
I'll be super brief, just to echo some of the other concerns. But again, I mean, I look at this and I see what you're going for, and I get that you want to secure that, but I do have big concerns about vesting to that, because we've seen that before, and a lot can change in that time, so I'll end it there.
Any other council members that haven't spoken yet?
We have options, you know, there's a reason we want to annex into the city. We want this whole property to be part of the city and part of something greater than ourselves. And that's really the reason why. I mean, every community reflects the school district, every school district reflects this community. So we want to increase the partnership. We do have options.
Thank you.
As you do.
So if we just add to wrap up, so I'm assuming I'll come back to the next council meeting and council will give me some guidance to move forward through the planning commission hearing process.
Thank you.
We sure appreciate everyone's been so helpful in the process. Thank you.
The next on the agenda is AB 19-11, ordinance code amendments, RE public works director or building official for discussion only. And Ms. Hart is not with us this evening, so hopefully she'll be back tomorrow. So Ms. Thomas will take the lead on this.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and again. Let's see, are we doing the 11 first?
Yes.
Okay, so for AB 1911, this is really the easier list. This is for our first touch, it's not for a decision. This is a one-section change, removing the public works director as the building official, or the one who assigned as the designee. This will need to go to Rachel for confirmation of whether or not we need to change it to be community development director or assigns or designee. And so I'll be working with Rachel on that item. But it's really just more, these next two code pieces and changes are really just to acknowledge that we're restructuring building planning into one unit and then taking off the assignment of the building official to the public works director.
Any discussion? Seeing none, Councilmember Iyer and then Councilmember Hope.
Is there any consideration just leaving, building official or designee, just as in terms of keep that flexibility? Designee of the building official, as opposed to, that's my only comment, so.
Councilmember Hope.
Are there any future budget, can this affect our budget in the future?
Anything can always impact your budget in the future. I don't ever want to get in that squirrel hole. But you, as part of your budget, have already started to pull apart Public Works buildings officially. Up until this year, the Public Works Director also managed the building department and therefore, in some cases, the building official. So our previous director was also the building official, but we've had separate building officials. While I've been here, at least two of them. Your current building department building inspector is continuing his training to become the building official. And so he will, I'm assuming, will come back and he will be your designee. So you can remove the public works director and then just keep as your designee. I mean, there's multiple ways to do it, but it wouldn't necessarily be your public works director anymore. In the future, it would be a designee at a minimum.
Any further comments, questions? Councilmember Nowlan.
This one, well, maybe this is for the next one. Sounds like it's only $16. That's the full, every single place in the code that needs to be changed is just in one spot for this.
They only found one spot.
For that one, not for the next one.
Okay.
So our folks, how do folks want to bring this back? Do you want to bring it back for further discussion, consent agenda, or regular voting?
We can't do it by consent because
because it's
That's
an
right.
ordinance. So we have to go through a process and batch it and go to a public hearing.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go ahead and bring that back. Next up, Agenda Bill 19-12, ordinance code amendments, RV planning director, community development director. Again, Ms. Thomas will be taking the lead from Ms. Hart this evening.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. This one is really more about the reclassification of the Community Development Director. It is a first touch, and the Planning Director is just everywhere in the code for whatever reason. It's just the way it is, and it's been long-standing. And so when we look at changing the reference point, there are 89 references over 39 pages, and when you look at what the cost of that would be to recodify it, it's about $700.
Any just,
We said we are going to be doing other Chapter 14 code amendments, so we can, batch them all together, but the issue is it's by page, not by, one grouping of code changes. It's really by the page.
any questions or discussion? Councilmember Iyer.
So we've when we have definitely discussed the shifting of the building official, but in terms of the reclass, I mean, that's, it appears to be just in title only now, but is that another ordinance or another thing to be brought forward council in terms of the reclassification of the position?
Reclassifications of positions do not have to come before council if they are staying within the same pay range. We will have a staff workload analysis later this year that's going to be looking at all of the positions in the city.
If I may, I think reclassification is kind of being used. Good evening, City Attorney Rachel Turpin, for the record. I think it's getting used a little loosely here. I wouldn't consider this, like, you're not reclassifying your planning director in terms of, like, as you reclassify a position and change it in the pay. You basically did this change in when you passed the budget, you sort of, this is how you laid it out. This is just to make your code match what you've already done in the budget.
Okay. I guess that would be the clarification that we're not reclassifying the position, that we're essentially renaming it.
I would use the term renaming, probably.
Okay. I think it's probably more appropriate because a reclassification of the position would require council action.
That has a whole different set, and that's true. It's not necessarily, but that has a whole different, I think it's just more of a semantics thing, but I think it's more of a name change. You just want you don't want to get in a position down the road where I have to go argue that planning director really does mean the same thing as Department of Community Development Director. You know it's very obvious that it does. It's just making that final change.
Where would that be referenced in terms of clarification, in terms of guidance for a city, in terms of when a reclassification requires council action? A more formal reclassification? I mean, obviously the mayor and I are somewhat in not complete harmony on that issue. So where would I go to look up?
If you want to talk to me privately, I'd have it. I'm not going to answer questions like that and waive the privilege in an open public meeting, but certainly if there are issues, please come chat with me and we can talk about the division of powers more.
And it is 9 o'clock, so do we have a motion to extend the meeting to finish our business this evening?
So moved.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, we'll continue on with this discussion. If there's any further, Councilmember Appland.
I have a couple questions. So reclassification makes me think that we have another identified job position that we would be moving someone to. And so that's what you're saying, we're not doing that. We are just renaming the current position, planning director, to now being called
Ms. Thomas was already reclassified. Her position was previously reclassified, is my understanding. And then we passed a budget that essentially sort of merged these two departments, how you're doing it now.
I don't know if that was ever explicitly explained to council, that we understood that we were doing that, maybe.
In the budget process, it was made very clear the building was moving under planning and that the new title of that group would be community development.
The typical way that these types of reorganizations happen is they do it within the budget process. And then you follow up with code changes if you need them,
Okay.
which is really only necessary when you have a change in the name of your department.
So my next comment would be, and it kind of relates to what I was just bringing up with the school district, is that we are still just finishing up our first year with the tree code, sensitive areas code. That section of the code says planning director an awful lot. And so if we have plans to possibly tweak that waiting to do this in conjunction with that might be a smart move so that we aren't, and it's not just the cost, it's the effort.
And that is actually in this staff briefing, and I have in my notes from Diana, is that there are other changes that we're making to Title 14 this year. So we've actually, so all of those identified pieces, or 139 pages, 89 of them, have been identified, and they're buried throughout your development regulations, which is Title Chapter 14. So right now, what we've done is identify them for council.
Any further questions or discussion? All right, so we will go ahead and continue to move through the process on this one. Next up is Agenda Bill AB 19-16, approved resolution setting a public hearing upon a petition for vacation of undeveloped public right-of-way in the vicinity of Northeast Big Rock Road and the southerly portion of 3rd Avenue Northeast within the city of Duval, Washington, for a decision. Mr. Davis, and first up, I will ask for a motion.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Davis?
Sorry. Yeah, so tonight, planning staff is moving forward with a resolution setting a public hearing for the right-of-way vacation for March 19th, 2019. The council approve the resolution.
Do we have any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Motion passes. And one final item this evening under unfinished business, Agenda Bill 19-03, approved resolution lifting the declaration of emergency in response to a staffing shortage for the City of Duval wastewater treatment plant and Public Works Department. And this is for decision. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Councilmember Walker.
What is the timing for the information discussed that will be provided this evening?
I do not have a time frame. We are coming out of a second state of emergency with the storm, and we have priorities that have to get done with that as well. We need to do our staff prioritization, and we are still also working with some HR issues as a result. We will not have a final cost next week or at the next meeting. It will occur when we have the opportunity to get it done.
So about
I'm not going to give any timelines at this point because we are still in the middle of some HR issues that could be extended, and we will not have a final cost until that is complete. This has already been discussed.
what has been discussed?
Councilmember Walker, you have been emailing me, I've given you answers, and this was discussed in committee of the whole prior to this meeting.
It was discussed that you're not providing information, you don't know when you might, and you...
Councilmember Walker, this is a workload issue for our staff and an issue that we still have ongoing HR issues. And we need to, you can have this discussion with me offline at this point with our attorney.
Just prefer you provide information prior to a meeting based on a
Councilmember
issue
Walker.
that we are approved to decisions.
Councilmember Walker, you were emailed on a Friday evening in the middle of an emergency without council discussion on the issue, asking for information that our staff cannot provide over a holiday weekend, and we are still not done with the HR portion of the process. This is a technicality. The staffing shortage is over. You have been advised that a report will be provided at a future date. I ask that the council please respect that and respect the time of our staff and the opportunity to finalize the details that need to be completed. Councilmember Donovan.
I agree with Councilmember Walker that, and I understand that there's a timing here. I think where there might be some built-up frustration is that when this emergency was declared, council had requested, we were understanding that we would have a tally of the expenses throughout the process so we could know where we were at any point in time. And that was my understanding of what would be provided along the way so we could understand how much this was costing, and we really haven't seen that. And I think that council has given a lot of grace to say, I know there's a lot going on, we have to get through the budget. And here we are at the very end, lifting the declaration of emergency. We really haven't seen that kind of information along the way. I mean, here and there we've had little pieces of it. And so I just want to say that I share the frustration that we haven't seen, because I think this is very expensive to the city, and it's important to understand at what cost.
Absolutely.
So
And costs are not finalized yet either. And that needs to be understood. And every time there has been a contract of significance, we have brought it forward. The council has seen the bills that have gone out through the check registers as well. So, Councilmember Bernicki.
So in town tonight, we did have a presentation, and there were some figures that were given to us, and I think we have to allow for some time through the process to get the information. I would say that I would prefer that this conversation to that level of detail be taken separately out of this meeting and have that discussion. I'm very comfortable with where we stand right now, and I have full trust in the staff that whatever we have been doing the past 2 weeks to deal with our situation, that will come forward, and we will look at the figures and then have a discussion about it.
Any further discussion? Anybody that has not spoken yet that would like to further discuss this issue? Councilmember Hope.
I'm kind of at a loss personally because I'm not really sure what the process is. Is it normal to do this prior to having is there some?
There's no legal requirement for a report. This is something we are doing internally already. Is the plan to come back to council and also analyze what these costs are in the long term, and what, from my perspective, also what it costs to hire interim directors and looking at bigger picture, long term staff workload analysis, etc., and not doing things right in the first place, and how that impacts our effectiveness and bottom line as a city.
I have faith that you have made good decisions along the way, so I'd like to see that, but I'm comfortable proceeding. Thank you.
Can I just make one point of clarification?
Yes.
I think that council members are talking about two different declarations of emergency, so I want to make sure that we're clear that we've only talked about the storm declaration of emergency in the CAL, and what we're talking about now is the declaration of emergency for staffing, the staffing shortage, just so that it's been commingled in this discussion.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Ryder.
I just wanted to state my support in my fellow council members just looking to just try to do a good job representing citizens of getting numbers and information, and I'm comfortable moving forward where we are now, but I think it's an important endeavor to trust yet verify. So I hopefully the mayor, I get the impression the mayor understands that, and that we can move forward in a constructive way and get these numbers in a relatively timely manner.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of lifting the state of emergency, please say aye.
Aye.